just don't understand.
Maybe we do, son. Don't think you have a corner on all of virtue vision in the country, or that everybody else is fat and selfish and you're the first generation to come along that's felt dissatisfied. They all have, about different things, and most of them didn't have the same opportunity and freedoms that you do.
You're taller, stronger, healthier, better educated, and you live longer than the last generation. And we don't think that's altogether bad. You've probably never seen a quarantine sign in your neighbor's door. Diphtheria, scarlet fever, whooping cough. Probably none of your classmates are crippled with polio. You don't see many mastoid scars anymore. We've done quite a bit of fighting all around the world. Whether you think it was moral or not, a lot of people are free today to make their own mistakes because of it. And that may just include you.
I don't know. Maybe part of it's the fact that you're in a hurry. You've grown up on instant orange juice. Flip a dial, instant entertainment. Dial 7 digits, instant communication. Turn a key, push a pedal, instant transportation. Flash a card, instant money. Shove in a problem, push a few buttons, instant answers. But some problems you can't get quick answers to, no matter how much you want them. We took a little boy into Central Receiving Hospital yesterday. He was 4 years old. He weighs 8.5 pounds. His parents just haven't bothered to feed him. Now give me a fast answer to that one. One that'll stop that from ever happening again. Tell me how to wipe out prejudice. I'll settle for just the prejudices you have inside yourselves. Show me how to get rid of the unlimited capacity for human beings to make themselves believe that they're somehow right and justified in stealing from somebody or hurting somebody. And you'll just about put this place here out of business.
We remember a man who killed 6 million people and called it social improvement.
So hang in. Don't try to build a new country. Make the old one work. It has for over 400 years, and by the world's standards, that's hardly more than yesterday.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Byrne Power, and today we're going to be answering your questions. Don't complain about my sound. I'm actually in a cave. So if it sounds like it's echoey, don't say boomer sound or something like that. People do these strange things. I like echoey sound. Some people like it to sound like you're whispering in their ear. Anyway, enough of those kind of technical, fiddly things. The truth is, I'm in Varzia. And I decided to do the introduction to our question and answer video here because it seems like just a good time to do something a little different. So I think first of all, if you are new to this channel, you can subscribe. You can smite the like button. You can, throw a few coins into the pot if you wish through PayPal. There's a link below. But mostly, if you like what I'm doing on my channel, do share it with other people, because that will help. So, let's deal with some questions, shall we? What we're going to do is we're going to start with kind of the apocalyptic, move through the historical and theoretical, and end with the personal. So I hope you find your questions here if you ask them. There were a few questions that I'm not getting to. One person, you know who you are, asked way too many questions. Some of those will have to wait, but I'll actually explain myself as we go. First question. I've really been enjoying your How We Got Here series, so my question is, what do you see as the future of the Western world? Well, in a way, I've discussed this in my Prelude to the New Dark Age, and you can go check that out. But I've had further thoughts since then, and one of them is this, that, what's going to happen immediately? Well, whoever wins the election in America, there will be more chaos, no matter what. It's just where we are. People are not in any sort of reconcilable mood. They're not willing to listen to people from the other side. And that's people on both sides of the fence. Yes, there are fine people on both sides. Everyone on the left is not a communist. Everyone on the right is not a fascist. It's just how it is. However, I will say this. We have been stoking the fires with propaganda. And those fires are not going anywhere. It's a bit like the town of Centralia in Pennsylvania. You should look that up. Centralia. It's a place where there were coal fires under the city, and they couldn't put them out. And they just kept burning and burning and burning, and they are still, to my knowledge, burning today. And that's what our fires are like. Are we going to see pitched battles like the first American Civil War? I don't think so. Are we going to see people who want to secede from the Union and have California break off? Maybe. California, Oregon, Washington, maybe. Will that work? Probably not. And for those who are on the right who say, well, good riddance, let's get rid of them, or those who are on the left who says, yeah, it's about time to leave all those red states behind, etc. I would say there's a lot you're not taking into account when you say that, economically. Also, I think what we're seeing now, Paul Vanderklay had an interesting interview with Ryan Bennett recently, where Ryan Bennett was taking kind of the apocalyptic mode. All this stuff is happening. What's going to happen? And Paul was saying, well, a lot of stuff is always happening. And I think what we see now, and this is where I agree with Paul, is it's not the end of times. It's not some big thing that's going to take everything with it. However, I do think the chaos will increase. For instance, and this was a point Paul made that I thoroughly agreed with, that we are seeing, the people who are out there rioting and causing the unrest are like children. They have no idea what they're doing. There's no real tactics. I mean, anyone who studied anything of the history of warfare or anything knows that within seconds you could, a real disciplined police force could just sweep all these people away. They have no substance. They are really LARPing. There really is a live action role play. They're imitating videos they've seen, films they've seen, what they've heard about revolution. They're not really trying to be revolutionary. I mean, yeah, they are. They think they are. But anyone who knows that, if you really want to go for the power, you go for the sources of that power, which would include the communications. But, the funny thing is these people who are, particularly on the left, acting like they are revolutionaries are completely in line with the biggest corporations in America, with the Democratic Party, with the educational systems. They aren't rebels at all. It's really funny. They are LARPing. They are just pretending. They are doing revolutionary things, and it's annoying as hell, but they aren't the real thing. But here's what I think. This is a prelude to the real thing. The real thing will come in about 25, 30 years. I'll probably have shuffled off this mortal coil by then. Yeah, because what it is that these people are like hysterical children. And what I see in our politics today, a lot of hysterical children. And a lot of these hysterical children are like 50 and 60 years old. That is to say that they're, every generation since the baby boom has essentially been juvenilized. And, they just want to watch more Game of Thrones. They just want to go to another baseball game. They don't have the seriousness of revolutionaries, which is probably a good thing. because otherwise they would figure out ways to really do things. They don't have tactics. They're afraid. But I think there will come people someday who will not be afraid. And if you were to ask me what the source of that will be, I would say it's not the racial issues and not the gender issues, although those will all be in play. It will probably be the ecological issues. And I think, see, I've been thinking this since the 90s. Eventually, some people are going to say, so many of our problems are caused by having too many people on the earth. So what's the solution? What would be the solution? Lessen the numbers. And as soon as some people get there and are willing to do that, now you've got a serious problem. And I think those people aren't quite there yet. They're getting there, though. If you look at the kinds of activism from PETA, if you look at sort of some of the radical eco stuff, it's there. And each group wants to dominate the conversation. So is it race? Is it gender? Is it equality? Is it, or equity? Or is it the ecology? And each group wants to, in a sense, be the umbrella under which all the rest fold. And I suspect we haven't seen anything yet. I think the 20th century may end up making the 21st century look like a dry run, but perhaps a farcical period is where we are now. It's definitely still in the farce realm, and it's all happening in people's minds. There are no big physical issues. It's all in people's minds. People say, yeah, but you don't really understand. Donald Trump is a racist. Or you don't really understand. When these people come, I've got my gun. And they're not going to get anywhere. To which I'm saying, you don't understand. You're watching stuff like, hopefully not me, but people like me talking, pumping you up. But propaganda can only go so far. It can push you to action, as we see in places like Portland or Seattle. But it's not getting everyone with their backs up against the wall. But we'll see what happens. If that happens, the rest of the world is a domino effect. Essentially that wherever you are in the world, you will be affected by what happens in America. America's just too big to fail, as the sentence goes. So I'll leave it there for now. I could go on, but maybe another video, part 2 of Prelude to the New Dark Age. That was a question asked by Indie Defense. Ebb and Flow asks, what should we do as individuals to worry less? The times are getting darker here in Canada. Many in my family have bought into way too much of the left-wing propaganda. There's a very existential alienation, I feel, when this compounds with limp-wristed authority at my workplace. And then he's got another question, which I'll get to in a minute. What should we do to worry less? Well, worry is like it's like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the better you get at it. So I would suggest not exercising it. Yeah, that is to say, there is a difference between genuine concern and worry. Worry is a species of fear. Fear is not a good thing under most circumstances. It's a good thing when, I used to feed pigs when I was younger. And it was a good thing to have a healthy respect for what those pigs can do. They can eat through your legs. Yeah. So when you get in a pen with a mother pig and her piglets, you exercise a bit of respect, which is generated by the fear of knowing what that animal can do. But to worry, no. There is no point in it. You have to have other practices. There is no point in worrying. Worry just adds to the problems. So what do you do to stop worrying? Well, for one thing, you have to look at your family as human beings. Obviously you do. But you can't look at them as a source of, you just can't say, they're not like me. because, well, they are like you. They're human beings. And that's the same with anyone who thinks differently than you. There are people out there, I mean, I read comments now from people on the right who scare me just as much as people on the left, because they're just saying, like, just you wait. Let them try. We'll, and I'm sitting there going like, yeah, you're playing a game too. And we need adults in this situation, not children. Worry does not take into account what can actually happen. Worry does not allow you to respond properly. How to stop worrying? Well, I don't worry a lot, so maybe I have something to say here. And when I say I don't worry a lot, it's not because I'm particularly don't have anything to worry about. If I wanted to think about my situation at any point in my life, including now, I could find lots to worry about. But I think that it's a habit of mind. When situations get difficult, you have to stay alert and face reality. You have to realize, yeah, we are encircled by propaganda. That includes you too. So what are you going to do about it? Well, I'll tell you what I do. I read books. Because books, and I'm talking about old books. I just finished reading quite a few H.P. Lovecraft stories. Now I'm reading Oscar Wilde, neither of whom I agree with, although I find it fascinating areas in which I do agree with them. And in a way, I find that the older modernists are now kind of on my side of the fence. It's a very strange thing. Maybe I'll talk about it in a video sometime. But I sense that sense of depression that's kind of overcoming you. So I deal with that near the end when we talk about depression. So maybe we'll wait for that to discuss this more. Ebb and Flow also asks, is it you who keeps asking these questions? Maybe sometime I'm really going to have to deal with this. I was wondering how the modern Western man is supposed to view women. I feel now that men should learn not to be held in judgment by women if it is always making them feel inferior. But at the same time, they are women and they should be treated differently. But how differently should they be treated? How should a man treat a woman, treat and view women nowadays? Does it make sense for a man to have the final say in a marriage and relationship? You realize you just asked 20 questions there, right? And I can't answer them all. All I can tell you is this. We are often being led to certain conclusions within our media, within our movies, within our television programs. The things are different now. Well, they are. But the basic facts of humanity have not changed one whit. That is to say, we are still men and women, regardless of what the non-binary folks say. You can say anything you want, but the reality is totally different. Yeah, we have changed. Yeah, there is more equality within the workplace. Yeah, there is an attitude. Now, what's interesting is I'm living in Georgia, the country, not the state, for those of you just coming upon this and don't know my story. And women here are still basically women. There are very few, I'm thinking of the most radical woman I've met here. Totally a woman. That is to say, she doesn't, what it is she doesn't have that attitude thing that you find in the West, particularly, and I think Americans are the absolute worst at this. That is to say, we think, and part of it is it's a rights-based idea in the wrong sense. Basing things on rights is great, but if you think that your privileges are rights, you're in trouble. So I think that people in the Western world, particularly the Anglosphere, and really particularly America, women have learned, in not all places, I certainly know a lot of women who reject these ideas, But I also know lots who, you just say the wrong thing and they get on your back about life, about how you're dealing with things. To which I think what has happened to men who have gotten, frankly, tired of being scolded all the time and corrected is that men have retreated into, what can I say? Men have retreated into, sports on television and porn, video games, drinking beer, eating popcorn. In other words, they've essentially left they've just said, I can't deal with it. And that has to be the wrong approach, period. That is to say, to simply to stay a child, to remove oneself from the company of women, that all has to be wrong. We have to learn from women in order to give something back. And we do need to give something back. Because this is such a huge thing, I'm going to think about how I might address this in a longer video, but let me put it to you as simply as I can. I have learned that men and women kind of have to get cross-pollinated. Not in the kind of gender questioning sense of our times, but that is that men who exclusively hang out with men, they end up forming an army of some sort, or they end up, even in the gay world, it's a separate unit that wants nothing to do with them, except on certain peripheral levels. Women who just are more, shall we say, just feminine women who hang out amongst themselves, get isolated more. They're always looking for friends, but it becomes harder because there's a certain amount of competition. And I think that, men's strength is that we have the ability to look at things, I would say objectively, but that word's been overused. I would say we have the ability to look at the thing. Women have the ability to look at or to hear relationships. Men spend more time looking, women spend more time hearing. We need, as men, to spend more time hearing and to learn that from women. And women need to spend more time looking and to learn that from men. I'm not saying that there's not corruptions on both sides. Gossip is primarily, but not exclusively, a female sin that involves hearing and then spreading rumors. And things like porn or the objectification of women is the kind of a thing that a man will do in a world of things. We need to find ways to work against those. So we have to be open to what women have. At the same time, like I say, in the West we have far too many women who are just simply trying to usurp what it means to be a man. And they can't. And it's clear they can't. That is why we find this kind of harridan haranguing that drives Western men insane, and they don't know what to do, which is why they've retreated from the field of masculinity. We have another question about masculinity coming up, so hang on for that. And I'll continue it at that point. Meanwhile, Daijin says, hello, Mr. Byrne. I like how he always calls me Mr. Byrne. It's Mr. Power, but I'll take Mr. Byrne. I hope you're doing well. I am. So while I was watching, and still watching it from time to time, the Cargo Cult video, which, by the way, the Cargo Cult video is like ramping up in the numbers. I think it will eventually surpass the Joker as my most watched video. I was wondering, is Christianity, especially in America, he says, has it turned into a form of a cargo cult? All the different denominations, sects, such as Pentecostal, Prosperity Gospel, Southern Baptist, etc., are Christianity that has fallen into the trap of the cargo cult. He's asking if they have. If that's the case, then what is Christianity? What do we do with it? I hope this question makes sense. I'm sorry it may be too theological for you. Thank you for your time and all you do on the channel. Why? Thank you, Daijin. So, there are a couple of different things involved here. One is, why there are so many Protestant denominations. And the other question is, what about the newer stuff? The seeker churches, the mega churches. He mentions the prosperity gospel and such. So let me put them in two different categories. The reason there are so many denominations is because Protestantism essentially allows you to read the Bible for yourself to try to understand the Word of God, whereas both the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches basically say, you know what, interpretation is primarily the responsibility of the church because you are a fallen individual. And that isn't to say the church is always perfect, but that is my basic understanding of the difference between those two things. With the Roman Catholic Church adding this Pope on top of everything. Complex issues. But what happens in Protestantism is you have people who come along and they will read things one way, and then someone else will come along within the same church and say, no, 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 no. You're reading it wrong. And there are times when people are obviously reading it wrong, and there are other times when people, like the big issues that have roiled the 20th century were the gifts of the Spirit, speaking of tongues, healings, and stuff like that. Started off as these small Pentecostal independent denominations, but eventually moved into through what we call the charismatic movement into the mainstream denominations, but then began to separate churches between those who did believe in these things and those who didn't. Likewise, we are seeing the emphasis upon gender, LGBTQ issues, social justice, right now doing the same thing. So out of this moment, there will be churches that are, going with the new stuff, and people who say, like, no, sorry, can't do that. That is why there are so many denominations. It is a question of interpretation of truth. Is that right? Well, ultimately it leads to the kind of antinomian world we live in where everyone makes their own laws. And I think that there is a problem, and you could call it Protestantism's original sin, is to let everyone interpret everything. Which is why the older Protestant denominations used to have confessions, creeds that you followed, and you don't get beyond those. That's why basically you believe the Trinity, and if you don't, you're outside of those denominations, which to me is like fair enough. But I think one of the reasons people are returning to, say, the Orthodox tradition now is because they just don't change. They remain a rock in the midst, which the Protestantism used to look a lot stronger when, it's just like, I believe, and here I can do no other. It's like relying on one's assertion of faith. But what do you do when you come to a culture where the assertion of faith is no longer got much cred? That is to say, it doesn't have the ability to, people don't mean it anymore. I mean, when I go to churches in America, what do people really believe? Do they believe? Do they have faith? I don't know. It's really strange. I don't even think they know what faith is, which then brings us to the next point. These big churches like, the Hillsong churches, where you have like maybe 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 3,000 people in an auditorium, all swaying and singing and getting filled with the Spirit and singing these kind of juicy, sentimental, repetitious songs over and over. I believe, I believe, I believe. That's a cargo cult. Because in those kind of cases where people are trying to work up their faith, yeah, that's a cargo cult. And there's a lot of that in America. So the prosperity gospel, certain of the mega churches, maybe all of them, I don't have enough connection to all of them to really know, but I know certainly some of them, many of them. But also in this new social justice faith that's entering into the churches, creating more divisions. It's a cargo cult. And so the point is, at that point, what's taken precedent is this desire for belief over rock hard, here I stand belief. Old school Protestantism was really hard to shake, whereas new school Protestantism is really wishy-washy. I don't know. What do you think? Write your comments below. Okay, our friend Knight Arnold he had way too many questions. One of them I just, forget it, that's way too huge. But I appreciate all the questions, Sir Knight. Okay, hello Byrne, I have many questions, but this has been burning on my mind lately. Many of my fellow Zoomers are adopting anti-establishment ideologies, to which I would refer you to what I said later. I don't think they're anti-establishment at all. I mean, if a person is on the streets of Portland, trying to burn down the courthouse, the federal courthouse, you could say they're anti-establishment, and yet at the same time, Facebook, Gillette, NBC, Disney, all these, the majority of the educational system, so much, the Democratic Party is all in alignment with them, so they can't be anti-establishment. What it is I think they're LARPing anti-establishment. They're pretending to be anti-establishment. Anyway, let me go on. And while I agree that the structures are quite flawed, they just want to get rid of everyone who thinks differently, which is different than a structure being quite flawed. I mean, yeah, all structures are flawed. I don't think that these ideas will get us anywhere. See the beginning of this where I talked about where the nowhere we will probably end up as we keep pushing these things. What do you think is the alternative to this? How can people manifest their good intentions in a more, and he puts in quotes, saintly, unquote, manner? And what's the alternative to this? Well, first of all, the alternative has to be, you just don't question the establishment for the sake of questioning the establishment. Because there are always people within the establishment and ideas within the establishment that are good. So you just don't say like, oh, this is what we've always done. Throw it out. No. You have to use, principle number one, use your intelligence, not your emotions, to try to understand things. Because, as I've said before in my videos on propaganda, first sign that you are propagandized is when you hear a word. If you hear Trump and you're knee-jerks, you're propagandized. If you hear Democrat and you're knee-jerks, you're propagandized. If you hear social justice and you're knee-jerks, you're propagandized. If you hear white supremacy and you're knee-jerks, you're propagandized. If you hear any phrase from any group that makes you just immediately react, and we all have these things. If someone says certain kinds of things, I mean, there will be words, I don't want to tell them to you because I don't want you to try to find them, but there will be words and things that people say that make my skin crawl. They make me, they make my back, all the hairs stand up. They make my neck feel like, But when I hear those things, I immediately go, okay, this is one of those things that I don't know, I can't stand hearing about. Okay, let's listen. And you have to use your intelligence to listen. Listening key. You know who's really good at this? And I think he was he was indeed raised in a Christian environment and then later gave it all up, but has slowly been trying to figure it out is Benjamin Boyce. I recommend his channel. And because one thing he's really, really, really good at is listening to people. He has all sorts of people that he interviews, or just even when he's talking, he has a way of listening, which is really good. Paul Vanderklay is another person. Listening. One of Paul's gifts is listening, and he'll have an interview with someone. He doesn't really know where the person is yet. They've said a few things, but you can see him. He'll start off the conversation one way, and he'll be listening, and all of a sudden he'll realize, ooh, they're really saying this. And you can almost see it in his face the moment when he goes, okay, we're going this way instead of this way. When you're not listening, you're just going your way. You don't care what other people say. So that's one way, is to learn to listen with your intelligence and your emotions, but they have to be in control. Secondly, what he says is, how can people manifest their good intentions in a more saintly manner? Don't jump to conclusions about what you think people actually believe, even when they are screaming it on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, or Twitter, and it seems like this is what they really believe. Not really. When we use the phrase possessed by ideology, really it sometimes is a momentary possession. That is to say, or it's a possession that's quite shallow and fragile. And if a person just sits and listens for a while, it'll break. And I've seen this more than once in my own life. We'll get to more of Sir Arnold's questions. But kind of related to this, Brian Crowley says, is it Crowley or Crowley? Says, he's got a couple things. Okay, I've heard you mention the notion of creepy, which I have to do a whole video on sometimes so people actually understand what my problem with that word is, and how it has become associated with old and homemade things. And I remember you drawing a parallel with the new cute aesthetic. Yeah, I would definitely say that cute is over here, creepy is over here. And when you make creepy things that are cute, you are violating the nature of the eerie quality of the thing to make it something you can just, I can deal with this now. So I've been thinking about the mustache. It's like you know what? There has not been one moment in my life when I ever thought a mustache was creepy. But maybe you think it's creepy, or maybe you know people who think it's creepy. Fine. As a cross-cultural symbol of militaristic masculinity. So we're going to get back to the masculine question here. I'm thinking of the Prussian officer, the Mongol warrior, the mustache built into the samurai's armor, the Gauls described by Diodorus, even terracotta warriors are mustached. While the full beard has been restored to civil society, the mustache maintains its creepy vibe. I would argue that it doesn't, but there is a reason why the mustache became very uncool, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The only exception being the unmilitaristic hipster, sporting the stash, or tash, as he writes it out, I prefer stash, in the service of irony. And there's a reason why it's ironic, and I'll get to that. So what do you think of the symbolism of the mustache, and why would it have this creepy effect on contemporary culture? And he goes on and says, I don't want this to seem like a statement, so this isn't, okay. Blah, 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 blah. Basically, he goes on and says some other things. And then he has kind of a follow-up, which I'll get to in a minute. Here's the thing. Yes, the mustache has been a symbol. Certainly, it's something women don't do. Especially a big, full-length mustache. Interestingly enough, the crazy mustaches that one saw in England in the middle of the Victorian age were actually imitations of crazy mustaches that the British saw in India. And so there are these cross-cultural things. Here's the deal. Yeah, mustaches do certainly symbolize a certain kind of masculinity, if for no other reason than it's really hard for, we'll say, the vast majority of women to grow such a mustache. But why did the mustache start to take on a very different quality? The answer, and you can see this a little bit if you go back to my late 70s video and my Origins of the Counterculture, How We Got Here video. It's because of the gay movement and what happened in San Francisco and other gay places in the 1970s. And that is to say that, as in the Village People, again, I refer you to the Origins of the Counterculture video, certain emblems of masculinity were looked at in a certain kind of a camp aesthetic. Camp being a kind of a proto-postmodernism, primarily used in the gay communities to essentially to reposition, to reconfigure, to deconstruct, to use the terrible word, the what a mustache was, so that by the time of the late 70s, the only people who had those huge mustaches were essentially gay. So now eventually started to change again by the end of the 80s. But, I think Freddie Mercury, he grew the gay mustache. The guy in The Village People has a massive mustache. But these were ironic takes on the mustache. They weren't the kind of pride that a person would have growing one of these elaborate mustaches. So, why did the mustache start to come back? Well, there were different reasons. For one thing, there are cultures that did not go through what America went through and the West went through during the late 70s. In other words, they didn't have a huge gay movement. And I use the word gay and not LGBTQ, etc., because it wasn't called that then. What they had instead was, for instance, if you look at and again, look at my 1980s video, Illusions of the 1980s, in the How We Got Here series. If you look at Lech Walesa, who is the head of Solidarity, he's got a great mustache. Why? Because in Eastern Europe, there wasn't a gay movement. So it's just that simple. And so people didn't have this association with it. So consequently, he walks with a bit of swagger with his stash, But, and I would say the reason the hipster mustache is ironic is it's very much the postmodern descendant of the gay mustache. It is essentially a take on the mustache. It isn't actually growing it. And having said that, I don't think, is the mustache just purely a militaristic thing? Here's where I start to have a lot of problems with that narrative. And that is here. You might as well just say the clean-shaven face and crew cut is a militaristic thing as well. Why? Why is the crew cut and shaved face a militaristic thing? And it is. I mean, you look at someone like Jocko Willink, who is a great guy, former Navy SEAL. He's got the shaved head, clean face, and screams military, But part of that has to do with the 20th century. Part of it has to do with why did men start shaving their faces clean? And there is a moment at the end of the 19th century when this began to happen, which I'm still trying to figure out the exact reason for. Part of it had to do with there was a new culture of modernity, during this bicycle built for two era, where people were just getting their cars and they were going to build their planes and stuff. And you look at the people who did that, most of them had fairly clean shaven faces, and there was the residue of the mustache from the Victorian era. But eventually, by the middle of the 20th century, the mustache, you'd see it on Clark Gable, you'd see it on a few old English actors, but essentially the mustache disappeared to the point where it began to be seen as subversive. So then eventually the hippies grew beards and mustaches, and if you look at album covers in the early 1970s, in America, a lot of people were doing the cowboys and Indian things where they were being the bandits, and some of these hippies would have these very big mustaches, which, however, eventually then mutates into the gay mustache by the end of the 70s. So I don't think there's one kind of militaristic look. I think there were pictures of guys with long hair and beards during the Serbian War who looked pretty darn creepy and militaristic with long hair and beards. There were pictures of what is it? You mentioned the Gauls. Yeah, but who was on the other side of that fight? The Roman soldiers, who were always clean shaven. I wouldn't say that the Gauls were any more warlike and militaristic than the Roman soldiers. I mean, let's think about facts here for a second. Who is more militaristic than a Roman soldier? Nobody. So it's like there isn't one kind of image. But is the mustache creepy? No, I would just say it's, at the moment, pretty unfashionable, much as powdered wigs are unfashionable. Although I would say there's a lot more, I did see more mustaches after the Pirates of the Caribbean movies came out. And so they're a little bit more fashionable than that. But I mean, the thing I've asked myself, and I've seen this happen in my lifetime, is why is it now every guy who begins to have thinning hair at all shaves his head? You know, it's like, where did that come from? Because it didn't happen when I was young. When I was young, there would be longer-haired hippies who had, you know, bald spots and such. It wasn't a thing, but now it's kind of like this fashionable thing. It too will pass, as all things do. Fashions come and go. But he ends this up with something else. He says, have you thought about the reemergence of, and then he puts in all caps, heroic vitalism. Then he says Nietzsche, D.H. Lawrence, Romanticism, as an online subculture, and he talks about the Bronze Age pervert and Uber Boyle, who are a couple of YouTubers. He says, this movement makes absolute immanent qualities such as awareness, vitality, experience, ecstasy, and the pursuit of such qualities the source of absolute meaning. I don't think this can end well. What do you think? Well, first of all, I did look these things up, and heroic vitalism, for instance, there seems to be a large, shall we call it, Aryan presence in this idea, and that is to say that they are looking at the old Germanic notion of heroism, which goes all the way back into the old Teutonic Knights and such. But what's happened is they've kind of misapplied the word vitalism. Vitalism, and if you can look this up on Wikipedia if you want a little bit of introduction to this, but vitalism has to do with the living matter and what causes it to be alive. So whether it's the ether in the air or the, you know, mesmeric influence, or whether it's, you know, it's this idea that everything has a spirit in it. Morphic resonance, you know, all these kind of ideas. And it's really kind of an occult idea about the nature of matter. Now, this is not what they're talking about here, especially not if they're referring, you know, if we're, you know, I'm not a fan of Nietzsche, although Nietzsche is brilliant and has some pretty interesting ideas. D.H. Lawrence I'm much less a fan of, particularly his Pillars of Blood concept. And by Romanticism, well, you do capitalize it. So maybe you're talking about the philosophical movement. But Romanticism also comes in many strains. There is a darker strain to Romanticism that eventually leads us to Germany and to Adolf. You know, and Adolf is nothing if not a late period dark romantic. But it also passes through the symbolist movement, which I am going to deal with at some length in the probably next year. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that. I don't. He then and how is vitalism properly integrated into a holistic way of being? Is it? That's my main question. You know, can it be? I don't know. What's meant by vitalism here? And I don't think all these people are in the same categories. For instance, Bronze Age pervert is a LARPer. This guy isn't serious. Uber boyos are not like the heroic vitalism or the Bronze Age pervert. They're more serious. They're much more Jungian. I'm not a huge fan of Jung, although Jung's got many great points. But I think if you follow Jung too seriously, you end up where early Jung was. And early Jung had a lot of references to the same Adolf in his pre-World War II books that had to be erased later. Certainly they never showed up in his English translations. So, because he saw that, you know, well, he's bringing back the symbolic, you know. But as Owen Barfield said, not all imagination is good. So remember that. Okay, this is another one from Knight Arnold. I'm just going to mention it and then pass on. He says, he's got too many questions. He says, what do you think about in-person role-playing games like D&D? They have become quite mainstream in the last few years. Look at the success of Critical Role. These activities seem strangely religious when they're participatory narratives, communities, art, and ritual. Is it safe to engage in such things, or should we skip them and participate in real culture and tradition? Well, I think you answered your own question at the end there. My feeling is that, and I have a good friend who went from online gaming into D&D. Often it was the other way around. I don't think D&D is the boogeyman that it was made out in the Christian community in the 1980s. However, I think there is a problem when it takes on this cargo cult dimension, and when the game overwhelms the reality, when the map becomes more important than the thing it's mapping. And I'm going to do something about games and also about geek culture much more thoroughly in the future, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But I would say it's not that these things are safe. Nothing is safe. Everything can be taken to extremes. Like I mentioned before, one of the worst experiences I ever had was at a Tolkien fan club. And I love Lord of the Rings. Tolkien was a Christian. I have no problem with Tolkien. Tolkien has wonderful ideas. These people, total cargo cultists. So nothing is safe. If the dear Bible can be perverted in a million different ways, everything else can. So is D&D safe? Not unless it's found a way to be perfect, which nothing has. Oh yeah, and you can go visit my other channel if you want to see this cave, Georgian Crossroads. Okay, from Peru, I believe, Ron, El Incontenible, says, "Hi Byrne, just finished watching Eyes on the Prize. That's the big documentary about the civil rights movement. I feel like I watched a different documentary, especially after reading the comments after I watched it. What is your take on the things that are in the documentary, and what questions do you think would be most crucial to ask about its content? Can't help but to think that the movement started with, 'We want to be like you,' but ended up with, 'We don't want anything to do with you,' which is a really good observation. And in fact, that documentary was produced in 2 parts. And the first part goes, it's about 6 segments that go up to the civil rights legislation in 1965 under Lyndon Johnson. Then the second part starts with Malcolm X and goes on into the 1980s. And you can definitely feel a sense of frustration and fear growing in the second part. We often think like we're going through rioting now. Well, the rioting in the 1960s was much more violent. If you talk about Watts or Detroit or Newark, much, much more violent. Which is why, being a bit older, I don't see this as the end of time, but I do see our propaganda as a real problem. But yes, I think you've actually nailed it, is that, the civil rights movement wants to initially be judged by the content of the character, not the color of the skin. But eventually wants to say, we want you to see the color of our skin because we've been oppressed, which is where we are now. Those are 2 different things. People today, I remember when this started in the LA riots, which I'll eventually get to, when they started to chant, "No justice, no peace," which I took as a really ominous chant from the beginning. Because the opposite is also true. If there's no peace, there can be no justice. Think about it. So yeah, there was a big change. And what do we do about it? Well, I would say stick with the content of the character. Recognize, people do have different skin colors and such, and that does affect the way they live. But that's not, ultimately, those are all, it's like you meet someone who's Polish, or you meet someone who's Korean. They're different. Yeah, their culture is different. They look different. fine. And then eventually you find out they're just like everybody else. It's like in Georgia. I'm constantly meeting people here who are very different from anything I've ever met before. But at bottom, we're all human. We all are worried about what people think of us. We're all, hope to be accepted. We all hope to find meaning in life. We all, want to be loved and to love. Those are all universal. But the way they express it, ooh, I've been surprised many, many, many times. Joseph Almeida says, I watched your Time series several months ago. It moved me deeply. Thank you. In my notes on episode 8, I noted the phrase from you to the effect of, now is the day we hold the past and future in one grasp. Our goal must be to get through the day with our relationships intact, improved if possible. Yes, I said something like that. As you create your How We Got Here videos, do you find yourself reaching into your memory, or do you find that your perspective has allowed you to keep the past in hand at all times? Is having the past in hand an output of living in time? Working off this image, what does it mean by which we can strive to keep a balanced proportion? What does it mean by which we can strive to keep a balanced proportion of past, now, and future in our grasp? Do you think that is possible or desirable? The answer is yes. I do think, my feeling is once I've dealt with a problem from the past, if it was buried in a closet, I leave the closet door open so that those winds can always blow through. My mother died in a long, drawn-out, horrible manner. I don't stop thinking about that because there's no point. Leave the door open. Let it, occasionally it'll drift through and it'll be painful. It's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be nice. I think the problem is that people who say they are living for now really literally mean now, this moment. Whereas the reason I talked about the day is because when you wake up, you're essentially starting over. And when you go to bed, you're done. So you have this period of time in which you can live. And you can see what's coming during the day. And as you recede, you can see what's happened. It's all very manageable. That's why the now to me is the day, not the second. Living for now means to live within the day, to work on one's relationships within the day, to deal with the past and present within the day. However, there is longer range goals and a future we are moving towards, and all of that stuff in our past, and not only our past, but the past of our families, our countries, our civilization, our race, our species, whatever. Not that you can put all that in your head, but nevertheless, it's all there. So I think that you have a responsibility to remember what you can, to pass on what you can, in such a way as that you're giving something to others, not that you're taking it away. What do I mean? You're not trying to say, you don't understand how bad the past was. And it's that old thing of when I was your age, I used to walk, I used to have to walk all the way from the house to the car to get to work, because now everyone's staying at home. But, it's like I used to walk 20 miles to get to school, is what people said when I was young. Well, that's punishing the past. I was talking with a friend the other day who said to me, I was passing on a few words through Facebook, and I said, the past is a place with rights of its own. And she was just immediately, I could tell that just rubbed her the wrong way, because what she was saying is the way those people looked at things then is just as valid as the way we're looking at things now, which is indeed what I was saying. And she wanted to think that we had actually improved, that we're better now, to which I'm like, yeah, we've made trades. So we have more independence now, and we're more isolated now. There's more, since people in the past used to not have any questions about identity because they knew who they were. Now we don't. So now we're isolated and adrift within this thing we call ourselves and identities, and we have all these questions. So do I get memories from working on the How We Got Here series. Well, yeah, absolutely. And always. And I appreciate it. And the more I can tap into what I actually experienced at the time, the better. I love thinking about the past. As Tarkovsky says, in a way that the past is more solid than the present, because the past has already happened. The present, we don't know what's happening today. We don't know how it will end. We don't know which way things will take us. And the future, well, it's out there somewhere. It's coming. Oh, there it went. But the past is solid. Now, of course, the interpretation of the past is up for all kinds of grabs, which is why I stress in one of my discussions on time the need for having a true witness of the past and not a false witness. I hope that helps you. If you have more questions on it, ask below in the comments. Liat says, I just want to hear you talk a bit about how or if you include the whole globe when you're making the Time and How We Got Here series. Did you have the time for any friends overseas? Was the U.S. the whole world for you, and that kind of thing? I've been remarkably lucky in that I have been able to connect to quite a few different places on the globe. I've traveled everywhere on the globe. I've still never been to Asia, never been to Africa. I'm pretty close to the Middle East right now, so I have a good scope on that sitting here in Georgia. Been to Eastern Europe. I've never been to South America. I've been to Mexico though. And I've been to quite a few countries in Europe. And obviously I'm an American who's been to all but 5 states. But here's the thing. I've also had friends from Korea, China, Japan, Malaysia, India, Pakistan. Obviously, I've met people from Iran. I've met people from Ethiopia and Ghana and Senegal and South Africa. I've met people, obviously, from almost every European country. I've met people from almost every Latin American country. I've met people. I grew up as a child in Hawaii, in Honolulu, at a time when I was in the minority. Most of the other people around me were either Hawaiian or Asian. I grew up eating dried squid thinking that was normal till I got to California and people looked at me like I was insane. So I have had quite a bit of exposure. Plus, I lived in New York City for 16 years. I could get on a train and go out to Russia and go to Korea and go to China and go to India and go to Japan and go to France and go to any number of places. And I had friends, and I've had when I first did my first serious international traveling in 1978, it was a real wake-up call for this person who was an American. But I immediately realized, this is what makes me different from them. For instance, my perception of space is very different as an American than a European. Everyone thought in London at the time that the journey between London and Oxford was a big trip. Well, by California standards, it wasn't even leaving the suburbs. It was just a small trip. It took me longer to hitchhike a ride there than it did to actually go through the ride. So, and I saw, that's what makes them different. So I've had friends from all over. And not only that, I've obviously read quite a bit, and you should see my record collection, which is huge, and has music from pretty much every corner of the globe. So, yeah, I kind of do take into effect. If I say something like, there was never rage in music before the time of the punks, particularly the Sex Pistols, with a short prehistory into Iggy Pop and such, I mean it. That is to say, I've thought about, what about the war chants in Tonga? I've thought about, is there any African group that does this? Well, what about this? What about that? So yeah, I if I'm going to make a statement like this never happened before in history, you can be sure I went around and crossed my T's and dotted my I's. So yeah. So in a sense, I've been remarkably lucky to have friends from all over, and I still do. You should see my friends on Facebook. I mean, and not only the places they're all from, but the times they're all from. I have friends from my high school period, friends from New York City, friends from Libri in Switzerland, friends from all my puppet travels throughout Europe, friends from Alaska, friends from random people. And of course, some of you are on my Facebook page, which, by the way, I will say this, I'm getting a few too many people on my Facebook page. So eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so it's a little harder to be my friend on there. Once I get to 1,000 people, I'm going to do that, just simply because I'm already, fortunately, at least half the friends are all Georgians who just are happy when I publish photographs of Georgian dancers and musicians and such. So I don't interact with them all that much. 500 people who are just have long names that end with Shvili or Adze. And some written in Georgian script that you can't read, but I can. So, nevertheless, if you want to be my Facebook friend, this is the time to do it. Byrne Power. End of story. Okay, I believe this is Joost van de Goor, which looks in English like Joost van de Goor, but I know that the Dutch, it's Joost van de Goor. Is that right? Writes, he's definitely from the Netherlands, writes, I love what Roger Scruton said about home. He said, we need a strong connection to the land and culture we live in, also a relationship with history. You live far from the USA in a country that is very different in many ways. How do you feel about that? Do you get homesick sometimes? Is it easy to connect with Georgians and become friends? Is Georgia becoming your home? Do I get homesick sometimes? Occasionally. I made a whole video on my Georgian crossroads about the difference between any American or Western European custom of Christmas and what I've discovered here. And that just, finally, the second year was like, oh my goodness, I just want a quiet, like Christmas Eve, and, it's just like Georgians do it completely differently. Such is life. But at the same time, when I look back at what's happening in America right now, am I homesick? Oh no. Because I'm sitting there going like, oh my goodness, I left just in time. And I feel sad for the fact that my fellow Americans are going through something. And I'm hoping there was a reason I got out early. So, is it easy to connect with Georgians and become friends? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I'm always meeting very hospitable Georgians. I could have lots more friends than I do now. No, in the sense that just because you get invited into someone's house or make friends with someone for a while doesn't mean you really understand their motivations for doing things yet. And I'm constantly baffled by, like, for instance, I have friends who I think were pretty good friends. And then they don't contact you for a year. And then you see them again. And I'm talking about people you thought you were having great conversations with. And then you don't talk to them. And then you talk to them again, and it's like nothing's changed. So, yeah, you can become friends. You just have to do it on their terms, not yours, as an American. You can't get all bent out of shape the way we would in America, because it doesn't mean the same thing when they're not spending time with you. And that's just life. Is Georgia becoming your home? I would say, yeah. More and more, I am understanding my way around. And I appreciate it. I often ask myself, what am I doing here? Not like, why am I here? When I look at, the whole, viral situation and whatnot, I'm like, okay, that's why I'm here. Or I do have friends here who are Americans and Brits and other folks. And I have my Georgian friends. But more I ask, who am I here for? What am I here to give? What am I here to learn? And I'm still learning those things, and I probably always will be. But you know what? It's just as tough to get to know Americans. I mean, they come off as very friendly in the beginning, but that's not really who we are. We're friendly, and then we're kind of isolated. Less so than the Georgians. Which brings us to the last question. Sir Knight Arnold, who wanted to get in so many questions, I'll give you one more little question, which is actually huge. A bit personal, he says, if you don't mind. Yeah, I don't mind. For the very same reason that I don't mind letting the breeze blow through of the past. It doesn't matter to me if it's personal. It matters to me. I mean, I've often said it's very hard to offend me because most people don't know what would offend me. So yeah, go ahead. Give it a try. See if you can. Or, what's too personal? Well, there are some things that are too personal, but under the right circumstances, bam, let's talk. Have you dealt with depression or other mental health issues in your life? If so, what has helped you to get back on track? And this obviously could be a whole video, but I will simply say this. Yeah, I have had periods. There was a big period in New York City for a few years when I think it's probably the darkest I've ever been. I lived there for 16 years, and pretty much at about year 7, 8, maybe 9, I went through a dark period. Because I couldn't make the connections with people that I was hoping to make. And of course, this has to do with love. It has to do with, again, asking yourself why you're there. And at a certain point, I said, okay, God, if you want me to leave here, I'll go. Halfway through about year 8, I said, I'll go. And because there was a lot of situations. And that week, a friend of mine called and said, hey, look, Byrne, I've got a friend who, I know you're kind of thinking about looking for a place again. I've got a friend who needs someone to stay with her in her house and kind of do chores for a while. You feel like, and doing the chores and such will be your job, and you don't have to pay anything. And I said, free place in New York City. You don't have to knock me over the head to realize I should stay. So, and I'm so glad I did, because it was the second half of my time in New York City where all the gold finally came. But how did I get through that? Well, one was understanding the value of memories. That's one of the things that came out of that, is my ideas about memory and time. Because I found myself repeating things over and over, as you do. It's like it's a snowball. It keeps coming down the hill, and each time it starts coming down again, it's bigger. And I realized that part of it is I had to stop and deal with the snow. I had to deal with the dogs chasing me. I had to deal with them before I could go on. So I did that. I went through a period of dealing with things and forgiving and asking forgiveness of people as much as possible. And that's what helped me get back on track. I would say, basically in life, there are 2 options that are presented to us, but the third is the answer. One is when we have fears and pains, hatreds, all these things that eat us up. One thing is to hide from what causes you pain. It doesn't do you any good. It makes you soft. It makes you a product of the pain. The other one is to fight, which, 2 points for, getting back at it, but no points for love there. So the answer is forgiveness. You can hide, you can fight, or you can forgive and be forgiven. And that's a big story. I think I talk about this a bit in one of my time videos. So, but basically, and on this whole issue of depression, and Georgia is kind of interesting. I don't see many crazy people in Georgia. Yeah, I'm sure there's some depressed people in Georgia. But I don't see the kind of rabid, insane people that I would see on the streets of New York, or that you would see in, I don't know, Seattle or San Francisco or Washington, D.C. And I remember the moment that I had this thought. I was in the metro here, and I was standing near the edge as the train was coming. And normally, that would be in New York City. You'd look around and say, oh, is anyone going to push me in? And I looked around, and I looked back, and I said, none of these people would push me in. You could just tell. They weren't, no one was crazy. And I thought, and then I started thinking, I'm not seeing any crazy people. Why not? Why aren't there any crazy people in Georgia? I mean, I'm sure there's a few. I've seen maybe 2 or 3 in the almost 2 years I've been here. And I thought, why is that? I'm in a big city. I should see a lot of crazy people in the streets. I see people begging for money on the streets, but they're not crazy. And I thought to myself, what is it? And I realized everybody knows where their family is. Everybody knows that everyone's connected to other people here. No one is isolated. In America, we're all isolated, and we're told to basically we're told to essentially go out and be alone, live on your own, in another city, away from your family, in college, in New York, or in, wherever you're going by yourself. And that's how you prove yourself. Except the problem is, as I discovered in New York City, that's where the crazy comes. And I think for me, it was starting, I could feel it coming down on me. But I also realized I have to talk to friends. I have to have people. Without people you can trust and really talk to, you go crazy. It's that simple. Sometime maybe I'll talk more about this. But And essentially, this is my problem with, back a while, Brian Crowley asked about these online movements. And here's the point. Online movement is still people alone. Unless you meet those people in reality, in real life, IRL, then it doesn't matter. Because ultimately, if you want to avoid depression, look around at your life right now. Ask yourself how many people are in your life. Are there any? I mean, people you can talk to, people who will call you on your bullshit. People who will say, what's wrong with you? People who will ask you questions. I've got some good friends here I can have some good conversations with. That's really important. Both Americans and people from other countries and Georgians. So that is important. That's why I feel at home here. I don't really have much of a family. I've got some somewhat distant relatives in Seattle, Washington, who I've never been that close to. So, and any other relatives are much further than they are from me. My mother passed away a few years ago. My father, my birth father, never was part of my life. So it was really possible to get totally alone, and I've never found anyone who it worked with as far as love. So it's real easy under those circumstances to become depressed, to suffer some serious mental health problems. And the answer to the question is find people you can trust. The emphasis is on the last word. People, yeah, real people, real life. Trust. How do you learn to trust? I talk about this in my Time series. Go back and watch that if you haven't. Okay, I'm out of here. I've been talking and talking and talking. Thank you. Such interesting questions. And I hope I've done some sort of justice to some of them. I'm sure I've not answered some of what you were asking. But if you have more thoughts, write them below. And if you're not one of the people who ask questions, go ahead and write something below, make comments. It's all good. And, well, not everything is good. There's real evil in the world. Why did I say it's all good? I hate that expression. Because for the same reason we all do stuff that everybody does, is because it gets in your brain. Well, we'll call it a day. Remember, subscribe, like, share, hit the bell notification if you want to know when I'm actually putting up videos. I've got another one coming next week. There will be one. I'm going to try to get to the next How We Got Here, the underground in the 1980s. Ooh, all I can tell you is this one's going to be dark. And meanwhile, what else have we got? Oh, check out my Georgian Crossroads channel. I've got some new videos there from a journey into Vardzia, the cave city in Georgia, where I have some interesting reflections on what that all means. And I'm out of here. So there you are. Questions answered for you. And I'm still in this cave. As long as you have this video, I will always be in this cave. Someday this video will disappear. People who say the internet is forever really do not understand the passage of time. Nothing is forever except God, but nothing we make, that's for sure. Well, thanks for supporting me. Thanks for the intelligent questions. I really appreciate that. The people who ask questions really ask some interesting questions, and I'm happy to give whatever answer I can. Meanwhile, like I said, like, share, subscribe, Hit the bell icon if you want to get notified of events coming in the past. Coming in the future. Although it would be kind of cool if you could get a notice of an event like, it's 1919 all over again. Okay, let's go back. No, it is 2020, and we're stuck here. This is not your mother's 2020. This is not your grandfather's 2020. 2020 is not hindsight, although a lot of people would like to put it in their hindsight. Okay, I've taken the cliched joke. But no, seriously, if you appreciate the channel, do consider contributing through PayPal, link below. And someday I'll explain why I'm actually living in Georgia. And no one's really asked that question, so I haven't answered it, because what's the point of just simply answering questions no one's asking? But like the Georgians say, kagad ihabi, which means be well and swim against the stream. That's the Anadromous life.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.